Okay, we are live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube, and then we're going to wait for the 5-second countdown from the lovely lady from Blog Talk Radio, who talks with a weird accent, like she's from England or something. Oh, there's Joe showing up just at the nick of time.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Hello,
Joe.
Joe. 3, 2,
Talks with a weird accent, like she's from England or something. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. It looks like I'm got feedback already. I got to mute that. Hurry. Okay, welcome to the show. Welcome to another edition of the Cross and the Crescent discussion group. This is a weekly talk show dedicated to establishing a respectful dialogue with those of other faiths. Today we are blessed to have, if you look at the studio in YouTube, we are blessed to have 4 additional, much better good-looking faces than we normally have, because we normally have our friend Chris Claus and his mug, and then we got Radical Moderate, him out there riding motorcycles and running red lights all over the city of Chicago. And so, as you can see, we have a much better looking crew. I don't know if they're much more entertaining, but we'll be finding that out today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. Last week, we had our friend Joe Marino and Janice Winchester. Oh, by the way, Joe, I bought your book this week.
Oh, thank you.
I hope I'm not disappointed. I mean, for 804 pages, for crying out loud, there's no way you can be disappointed in that. But I hope I'm supposed to get it Wednesday. But we're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. Last week we touched on the Shroud of Turin. In my I don't want to say infantile, but amateurish way, I have a kind of a rudimentary knowledge of the Shroud. Did a whole bunch of research on it because there was so many people are interested in this relic, for lack of a better term. As a matter of fact, it's the most studied relic on the planet as far as the Christian and Catholic Church is concerned. And we had a great discussion last week. We were talking about some of the proofs that we can demonstrate showing the veracity of the Shroud, and why I personally and millions of people across the globe actually think it is the burial cloth of Christ. And what that does, and the reason why this is a topic for this show, the Cross and the Crescent discussion group, because we try to interact with Muslims on this show as often as we can to show them the error of the Quran, the error of Muhammad, and how their belief system is not consistent with what they claim to be a Abrahamic covenantal religion. One of the claims in the Quran, if you go to chapter 4, verse 157, it clearly states that Jesus was not crucified on a cross. He was not crucified. He did not die, but Allah made it appear to them so. Now, how that works out in their world, that's between them and their imams and their theology. But it clearly says that Jesus did not die on a cross. So the reason why this topic, the Shroud of Turin, for this show is so important is because if you can show with physical evidence that there is something out there from the first century that provides you all the earmarks that are outlined in the Passion of Christ, as we find in the fourfold gospel, and you also have evidence within that fourfold gospel that there were linens, clothes that were discovered at the empty tomb, and that they were preserved, well, then that is something very, very different. And that provides a huge problem for our Muslim friends. So we have, as a matter of fact, there was supposed to be another gentleman that was supposed to be with us today. And let me see my email to see if he has sent me. Guy Powell was supposed to be coming. Let me, I'm sorry, I should have done this before. Here is the I don't know if I sent him the link or not for the show. And the guy, him and I had a conversation this week. He is writing a book of fiction that walks you through the life, quote unquote, of the Shroud. It takes you from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople to Savoy, France, or no? Where in France is it? Somebody help me out here. You guys?
Lorraine.
Okay, there you go. In France, and then it goes to Turin. Did I miss someplace? Did I miss the spot where it was supposed to be? And
Not really.
No.
Okay.
You got it pretty good.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go with that. So he is writing a book on that, and he said that he would join us today. And I just thought we would have him on for when we start, if we start looking at the historical claims. Okay. So what we are going to do today, our friend Deacon Andy, is it Weiss? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, Weiss.
Weiss. Okay. Runs a Shroud Museum in New Mexico. And he has a PowerPoint presentation to walk us through what the evidence is, I'm assuming, of the Shroud of Turin. And so, Andy, before you show start with your slideshow, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your museum, and what you do as far as the Shroud is concerned?
Okay. Well, I'm an IT guy by trade, so I do that. I teach at the college. Local college IT classes. I'm a deacon, obviously, and I'm a reader. I read a lot, and when I met Pete Schumacher, who started the museum, he wanted me to make a website. This was in 2009, so we got together to have a sandwich and talk about it, and I made this website, and I didn't have any information about the Shroud. I didn't know anything about it. So I would go to the museum every weekend. I would learn, and I would listen to speakers, and he had all kind of speakers come in, and I would ask them, well, if you were to read one book, what would it be? And then I would read those books. And over time, I learned. And as time went by, we had the museum, I had the website, and Pete got a little older, and he needed to retire, and I'm just the president because no one else would do it. And so I'm just trying to not mess up too much. And so my interest in the Shroud really comes from sitting in front of it. A lot of people, you'll probably get the same kind of response. I'm a deacon in part because of my sitting in front of the Shroud. I had a conversion of heart, a deeper conversion of heart. And so that's why I'm here.
Okay. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what your experiences is with the Shroud? Just take a couple minutes to do that.
Sure. I'm retired, happily retired. And so that gives me the opportunity to pretty much do what I've wanted to do since I started studying the Shroud in the late 70s, which is work on the Shroud full time. I'd seen a book on the Shroud in 1977, but had never heard of it. And I read the book. It was called The Fifth Gospel. And it said, "Is this the face of Jesus Christ?" by Thomas Humber. And read the book in one sitting. That was the year before the Shroud of Turin Research Project, which is known as STURP, went over to study it in 1978 when they had 5 days around the clock to study cloth. And even though we didn't have as much evidence back in those days, of course, I was convinced by the available evidence at the time that the Shroud was probably authentic. And so I went to the bibliography in the book and started going to the libraries. And of course, those were pre-internet days, so you had to go to libraries to find things. And started collecting materials and trying to get other books. And I got some slides from the Holy Shroud Guild, and like Andy, it was a real conversion experience for me. I ended up joining a monastery for a time, and when I was at the monastery, I used those slides to start lecturing in the St. Louis area, which is my hometown, and started communicating with the scientists and researchers. Started going to conferences. I went to my first Shroud conference in 1986, and I think I've been to like 10 or 11 since then. I'll be going to another one later this year and another one in 2022. So I've pretty much read everything in the English language. Unfortunately, I don't know any other language, but thanks to Google Translate, I can figure out what other people are saying in other languages. It's really quite good. I remember in the 1990s using translation software, and it was pretty much next to useless. I mean, it was really bad. So I have probably the single best personal English language collection of materials in the world. I pretty much save everything I get my hands on, and I write articles. I've written 2 books. I give papers at most of the conferences that I go to, and I'm a hardcore Shroudie.
A hardcore what?
Shroudie. You know, like
Shroudie. Oh, Shroudie. Okay. Okay.
You know, like a Trekkie, not
Kind of like
Shroudie.
yeah. Okay. There we go. It's like a cheesehead from being a Packer fan up in Wisconsin.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get it. Okay. A Shroudie. I like that. I'm going to, well, I tell you what, I'm going to get that. What do we call that when you can get it copyright? There we go. I'll get it copyrighted, and I'm going to sell all kinds of material with it. A hardcore Shrouding. All right. Our friend Janice was here last week. Janice, we told everybody what her qualifications were as far as in her relationship to the Shroud, but I want you to go ahead and remind everybody what your relationship to the Shroud has been and what type of work that you have done and what your experiences are that qualify you to. Well, you've written several papers on the Shroud yourself, if I'm not mistaken. So go ahead, Janice.
Hi, thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. And yes, I have worked science area since 1970. And that, and studying about the Shroud, knowing about the Shroud, I've known about it for a long time. And when I was at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences back in I think it was the 80s, when Dr. John Jackson and his group gave a paper on the Shroud. And I didn't get to listen to it because I was conducting another meeting. And then after I retired, I just started traveling to visit all these Shroud researchers and studied about it and wrote about it and presented at the international meetings and forensic science meetings. And now I'm on this conference call. So it's quite amazing what God has in store. We just have to listen.
You muted yourself, Eric.
Sorry about that. My grandson came in. Sorry. We're going to go ahead. Yeah. He doesn't care if I'm what the heck am I doing? Whatever is important right now, it's important to him. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have Andy is going to share his screen. He has a slideshow that he is going to walk us through and give us a bunch of information on the Shroud. Now, you will Shroud. What you will be glad to know is that he has reduced this. What was it? 129 slides, I think it was.
Well,
when
our slideshow on the website is 180 some odd slides, but this is a specific 2-hour presentation. If you wanted a 13-hour presentation, we could use that long one.
Well, okay, so he's reduced it down. He's reduced it down to 27. You said, right?
Yes, 27 slides.
Okay, 27. Okay, 27. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and let him. I'm sharing his screen, and we're going to go to full screen here. If anybody has a question in chat, or if you have a question or you have something to comment upon here in the studio, Joe, is it Aruna? Is that how you pronounce your name, Ms. Rodriguez? Is that it?
Yeah, she's muted. It's Aruna.
Okay, yeah, Aruna. Okay, so if you have any question, feel free at any time to, I don't want to say to interrupt Andy, but interrupt Andy if you have a question, because we can get going. I mean, when you start presenting these things, you get in a groove and you don't see anything else. So if you have a question or comment, something to add to that, please, by all means, go ahead and interject. All right, Mr. Andy, the mic is yours. Go ahead, sir.
Sounds good. So this first slide is about our museum, and that old building that you see is the building that we have that was donated to us that needs lots of repairs. We're in a small town, so unless we can get a GoFundMe or grants, the progress is slow. But that's our home, and we're working on improving it. And so any donations anyone wants to give is more than welcome. There's the website up on the right side. And that's enough about the museum. And so let's start with the shroud. I thought it'd be a good idea to do an introduction. You can see the measurements at the top, the old measurements. Down at the bottom are the measurements on the negative photo. That's the post-resurrection or restoration. It's a little bit bigger because they flattened it out. They flattened out all the creases, which destroys historical information, but they did what they did, and that's all that they did. Down below the negative image, I have, hey, my mouse is alive. Down below, I have, those are black and white images. So that's the positive image that's made into black and white. And if you look at the wrist and you flip that up, you flip the frontal view up, you'll see that the wrist is opposite the negative image. So as a basic introduction, the shroud, hopefully everybody can see the image on it. The shroud is a flax linen burial cloth. It's a 3/1 herringbone weave, so it looks like a chevron, the weave of the cloth itself. The image itself is only on the first 1 or 2 microfibers, about 10 microns deep, which is about the width of a human hair. The image itself, the negative has positive properties and the positive has negative properties, but it's not a picture. It's an image on a cloth. And the image itself was a change in the carboxyl structure of the flax linen so that it aged differently where the image is than where it's not. The cells of the flax linen are not damaged as expected if this were made by radiation. So most likely it wasn't made by any radiation that we know of. The image itself has pixelation. It's like a dot matrix printing. If you know dot matrix from many years ago, the more pixels, the darker the image. The less pixels, the lighter the image. If you had the Shroud of Turin and you took a razor blade and ran it over the image would be gone. That's how surface it is. There's a cloth to body distance relationship. So depending on where the cloth was in relation to his body, depends on how dark or light the image is. And so you can see, for example, the tip of the nose is fairly dark because the shroud was probably resting on it. Modern scientific studies start in 1898, and that's actually when our town, Alamogordo, was founded. And when our town was founded, the 43-year-old amateur photographer and lawyer, Secundo Pia, took the first photo. And when he developed the negative, I've heard that he almost dropped a plate. He was the first one to ever see this negative image, not in this, not as good as the image on the screen, but he was the first one to see it. In 1902, 48-year-old Yves Delage of the Paris Academy of Sciences concludes that the shroud is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. And he's laughed out of the academy. Most of them were atheists, and he himself was not a man of faith, but his conclusion is that the shroud is authentic. In 1931, the 47-year-old Giuseppe Henri he does a high-resolution post-contrast image, and he confirms what the Pia image shows, because when Pia took the image, there was a lot of disagreement that he didn't know what he was doing, that he was just an amateur. But Giuseppe Henri was a professional photographer, and so his image actually confirmed what Pia took in 1898. For the STURP team, now the STURP team is a pretty substantial part of studies of the shroud, because this information gives us the most information we know about the shroud. And so the STURP team ends up being very important in studies of the shroud. So in February of 1976, John Jackson and Bill Modern at Sandia looked at the image through the VP8, and it revealed 3D properties. In 76 later, Jackson and Jumper actually tested it with Pete Schumacher. Pete Schumacher was the production engineer for the VP8 image analyzer. It's a piece of analog equipment, and one of the things it does is make brightness maps. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides. And so they went to Jumper's basement, and he sets up this VP8, and he's calibrating it, and they're chomping at the bit. But Pete tells them, if you don't let me calibrate it properly, you're not going to get the right result. And so once it's calibrated, they put it in there. And Pete has told me this story many times. They look at this 3D image that comes out of the brightness map, and brightness maps don't make 3D. And he says, what's that? And they say, the Shroud of Turin. And Pete says, what's that? He never heard of it. In 1977, they hold a conference in Albuquerque at the Hilton in Albuquerque to establish the protocols if they were allowed to test the Shroud of Turin, what they would do. These are some of the greatest minds in this country, in America, back in the 1970s. And so in 1978, in October, they were allowed to test the Shroud. They had created protocols for 24, 48, and 72 hours. They got 120 hours. They got 5 full days. They took 6,000 pounds of equipment with them. And most of the 26 thought they would discover a logical explanation in 5 minutes. They'd see the brush strokes or whatever, and they'd enjoy a nice vacation. Well, some of them didn't sleep at all, and they didn't have a vacation, and they're still stumped today. And so that team actually made special equipment. They made a table to put it on with removable panels. They actually made magnets coated with Teflon so they could put it on the shroud, and they wouldn't damage the shroud, but they would hold it in place. They made an applicator so that they would put an exact known amount of pressure on the shroud, and they had 3M make a tape that could take samples from the shroud without damaging the cloth. This is the level of expertise that they brought to the study of the shroud. In fact, they brought Mylar, they brought some stuff from the space program, and because all of the equipment was stuck in the port for 5 days because they saw the radiologic sign, because they had some x-ray equipment with them to do some x-ray tests, and they wouldn't release it from the port. And so part of the table was rusting, so they put this Mylar on top of it to protect the shroud. This is the level of expertise that the shroud team brings to this. And they only had really one main question. Their question was to explain how the image got on the shroud. And ironically, science can tell us more about what it's not than what it is. There isn't anyone on the planet, those who accept its authenticity and those who do not, who understand the process that made the image. No one can duplicate it. They can duplicate maybe one aspect or another aspect of the shroud, but they can't duplicate the whole shroud as it is on the cloth. And now, without any interruption, we'll continue on to the VP8. And please interrupt me if you have any questions, if you have any comments. If Joe or Janice have something to say, please, by all means, stop me. You know, as Eric said, once you get going, you don't want to stop. But I'll be happy to stop. So the VP8 itself is analog equipment. It's from the 1970s. Back in the 1970s, it was $25,000. Now I think you can find it on, if you found it on eBay, it would probably be $100. It's old equipment. My mouse is still alive. I might have to move my mouse. Anyway, so using this brightness map, what they discovered, Jackson and Jumper modeled in cardboard the Man of the Shroud. Now, the image that you see on the left is the way that the cardboard model was displayed in the Air Force downstairs chapel, the Air Force Academy downstairs chapel, back in the 1990s. I know because I was there. And when I was going into church, they had this image in the hallway. And I looked at it, there was no plaque, it didn't say what it was. And I looked at it and said, what in the heck is that? And then I went into church and I didn't think anything else about it. And the one on the right is the same cardboard model taken from different vantage points so you can see different colorations. But on the left of the shroud, they have all kind of plaques of information. So there's no confusion about what it is. And so what they did was the VP8 allows you to take one line at a time. So what Jackson and Jumper did is they used their free labor of the cadets at the Air Force Academy, and they had them trace it out on paper and then trace it out on cardboard and cut out the model. And so what you see here on both sides is the same cardboard model. They used corrugated cardboard, so it gives it kind of a rough appearance. But that's actual brightness map data that comes from the VP8. And I think I said it before, but it bears repeating. The VP8 image analyzer does not do 3D. One of the things it does is it does brightness map. And so when you make a brightness map of the shroud, it comes out 3D. So there has to be, it's like Google Earth of the shroud. It's like there's a spatial database of information in brightness on the shroud that when the brightness map is processed, it comes out 3D. And so this is what you see, the green screen and the blue screen, those are from different monitors. That's the result that you see. You can see how the nose between the eye sockets ramps up off the face. You can see everything in proper proportion. I blew that up so it might be a little bit hard to see, but the smaller images might be a little bit easier to see.
Okay, Andy, can I ask you a question about this? Okay.
Of course.
Okay, when you start talking about a piece of cloth producing a 3D image, when you have actual photographs that are incapable of producing 3D images, has anybody provided some type of coherent, cogent explanation as to why this occurs with the shroud and not other pictures or anything like that?
Well, I've never heard of an explanation to directly answer your question, but the brightness map itself corresponds to height and depth, but nobody understands. I don't think anybody understands how that happened, because nobody understands how the carboxyl structure of the flax linen aged differently, where in the image that you see compared to the flat shroud on the right and left of the face.
And I might just jump in, if that's good for you. Andy's correct. One thing that helped me understand the VP8 was, say like you're above a mountain and it's snowing, so the mountain will show up as white because of its height. But if you put a suitcase on top of the mountain, it will show like it's on the ground because of, like what Andy said, the light and the dark. So what the VP8 does in conjunction with the oscilloscope is actually mathematically show the height, the length, the depth of each, like Andy said, pixel or line. And so when the oscilloscope gets this XYZ reading, there's a printout on the monitor that shows the height of something, so that you get the nose of the shroud in its exact proportion, rather than above the eye or something else that if it was just a regular photograph or even imaging in with the video camera, live person. So this all has to do with the brightness map, like Andy said, and as the oscilloscope then translates that into an XYZ mapping that you get this portrait of the face.
Okay. So if now, let's just make sure we're clear and everybody understands this. If you just put like a normal everyday run of the mill photograph underneath this thing, you're not going to get the 3D image simply because of the reasons that, to be honest with you, a lot of them are going over the top of my head, but that's okay. I don't need to get everything. But you're not going to get this from a normal photograph. And and what would you normally? Okay, let's ask this: what would you normally get a 3D image from? If you were going, because they developed this instrument for a reason to produce 3D images, what would you normally get these images, 3D images from?
Well, they didn't produce the VP8 to create 3D images. This is a surprise. This was a surprise to the production engineer, Pete Schumacher, who produced it. It's a surprise to everyone. This was not intended when they built the VP8. It's for space and other applications. And I'm not an expert on that. I wish I had Pete Schumacher on the line because he could give you more detailed information about what they made it for. But the brightness map is something that they make, but they never expected to get an image from a cloth that came out 3D. That was not an intended effect of the VP8.
And to add to what Andy said, their brochure mentions the type of space, and they also mention X-ray, but that's not what it was developed for. It was a byproduct of it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead. Okay. Thanks. Let's go ahead and did you have something to add to that, Andy? Were you going to throw something else in there?
No. That Janice said it quite well.
Was that Joe?
Yeah, Eric, I just want to mention Pete Schumacher has some articles online that are accessible. If people go to www.shroud.com and put his name in the search engine, his last name is spelled Schumacher. Pete Schumacher, some of his articles will come up and people can get more information there.
Right, yeah. Shroud.com is a repository for all the Shroud information. We have the same information about Pete's documents on our website, but we're a baby compared to Barry's giant.
There was a question. Hold on. There's a question in chat. Oopsie, grabbed the wrong thing here. Question in chat was, does the VP8 use sound waves at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. We don't.
It processes images. It doesn't process sound.
Okay.
And I might add that this was the 70s technology, but we have similar things today, such as Photoshop or ArcGIS or other types of spatial computer programs, some being free.
Yeah, Bryce is another BRYCE, but it's not free.
And it's amazing that when we think of 1970s, I mean, several of us here probably on the panel think of 1970s. That wasn't too long ago, but if you think about it, that was 50 years ago. So if you're talking about 50-year-old technology, that's, well, I don't want to say it's ancient, but it really is compared to how quickly technology has progressed in the last 50 years. Okay, go ahead, Andy. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, they have Image G, they have Image J, they have. There's a lot of software that allows you to do the same thing, but this was created after the fact, and it was created after this was discovered. That we didn't know that this property existed until we were able to process the image through the VP8.
And I might add, just what's so exciting is that the experiments I did using 3 different VP8s and 3 different oscilloscopes all showed the same results as what you see on the screen here from 1970s. So nothing has changed, like Andy said, and it's just phenomenal and exciting.
Yes, exactly, Janice. And that's how science works, right? You test it, with multiple pieces of equipment. If it does the same thing, then it's probably a property of the image.
Right.
May I interject? Is it possible that the shroud is coded with information, data?
Exactly.
Yeah, the shroud is coded with brightness information. It's a brightness map. The shroud image itself.
I mean, literally like the nose from the cloth, that kind of data to be able to give you a 3D effect. I'm not a professional in anything. I'm just asking a question.
Oh, well, that's fine. It's the brightness data. So the brightness value at the tip of the nose gives you that result when you process it through the
Okay.
VPA.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments or anything?
There's a couple from chat. Why is it called an oscilloscope? Is that how you pronounce it? I'm probably mispronouncing it.
That's what it's called. They're different types. And this particular oscilloscope analyzes the information coming in from the live video. So you have a photograph of the shroud, which is 2D, and then the live video camera brings it in to the VP8, and the oscilloscope then takes that data of light and dark and plots it on an XYZ axis. So you're getting the protrusion, you might say, of the portrait of the nose, like you asked about, because it's higher and lighter than the eye socket, which you see is darker. So this portrait 3D image appears on the monitor, and then you could print it out.
Okay, so they get that type of resolution from the amount of, and I hate calling them scorch marks, but marks on the shroud. Some are more, some are darker and some are lighter. Is that what you're saying?
And it's also the distance.
The distance. Okay. All right. I did have, right. I had another question was, or do they plan on doing any 3D printing model on this?
Yeah. In fact, the man that I studied with, Kevin Moran, bless his heart, he's passed away. His family is now using his technique to make night lights, and you can find them on their website of night lights of the shroud.
Okay.
They're really nice. Well done.
And one more question, and I think I already know the answer to this, but I'll let you guys answer. Will they do another carbon dating on the shroud?
Unlikely.
I don't fully understand why they would.
I'm sorry?
I don't understand why they would. I mean, there's really no point. It's already been vacuumed and cleaned and scraped. I don't know what other kind of contamination has gone onto the shroud since they started messing with it and putting it in argon gas, which nobody knows what effect that's going to have on the shroud. I don't know that carbon dating is really worthwhile anymore.
Well, you know, one other point about carbon dating is to go back and look at what they did at the time. And actually, what they're doing now is using that data to see if the results that were given back in the 80s are correct, or maybe there's another answer. So it takes another look, a closer look will give a different answer, that they didn't do the exact testing at the time, and thus we'll see what the answers are now. We've already found out that dating is incorrect.
I read an article. I don't know. It's been a number of years, so it's probably wrong, or who knows. But the bottom line is that they're storing it in some type. And correct me if I'm wrong here. They're storing it in some type of box that contains a chemical that has recent carbon in it, and then they're afraid that this chemical is going to permeate the fibers of the shroud, where it wouldn't matter if you went in and carbon dated the shroud now on anyway, because it would have this recent carbon contamination. Have you guys, anybody?
In the 80s, they did store, they cleaned the container with thymol. And
There you go. That's what it is.
Yeah, Ray Rogers said that kind of messed up any chance of doing another carbon-14.
Okay, that's what it was. That's where I heard it from. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed. We got. I'll just write down as many of these questions from the chat as possible, and you guys just keep on the trucking.
Sounds great. Next slide then. So now we go to photography. This is a picture of Barry Schwartz and Vern Miller. Vern Miller is behind that post. I actually talked to Barry yesterday about this photo, and he told me that was Vern Miller. I didn't know that before. But this is what Barry did. Professional photographer. My computer is still doing its own thing. Professional photographer. He put his professional 35 millimeter with his German lens on the rail, and he had to take two sections because he didn't have film that was 14 feet wide. And so he took two photos and then he spliced them together. And this is a picture of Barry actually taking the photos, and the majority of photos that are online come from this photographic session. And in this slide, what I'm contrasting is Secundo Pia, you see him on the top left and on the bottom left, and Barry Schwartz, you see on the top right and the bottom right. And I have circled Barry Schwartz's camera, 35 millimeter camera from the 1970s, and in the middle, next to it, is Secundo Pia's camera that he took the photo with. So we see the change of technology and photography over the last 80 years. And so here on the top, we have Secundo Pia's 300 DPI 1898 photo, positive photo, compared with Barry Schwartz's positive photo on the bottom. So you can see the comparison.
Hey, Andy, can you do us a favor? On the bottom of your screen where it says stop sharing, right next to it, it has the word hide. Can you click on hide to hide that? That way everybody can see your full screen that way.
Oh, yeah, that's much better.
Thank you, sir.
I didn't realize everybody could see that. Okay.
Yeah. They can see everything here.
Thank you. Perfect. So this is the positive image. Pia's is on the top and Schwartz is on the bottom. And then the negative, of course, is the easiest to see because the negative looks like a positive photo, but it's not a photo. The image is a brightness map on flax linen. Flax linen, the cells of it are like straws, and it's only colorized on one side. It's not colorized on the other side of the cell. And so that's how surface the image is. And you can see the 80 years made a big difference in terms of quality of photograph, where the Schwartz photograph is much easier to see. You can see the blood on the head. You can see the face. Everything is much better defined than the top photo of Secundo Pia. And this one here this is Henri's 1931 negative. It's a push contrast image. What push contrast means is that the mid-range of grays they get rid of. So the mid-range of grays either turns to black or to light. And so what the purpose of this photograph is to make it easier to see the image on the shroud. But if you use this photograph to say, I see, and you fill in the blank with whatever you see on the shroud, that's not reliable. You can't use it for that kind of research because it's a push contrast image. That's the difference between the Henri 1931 photo and these two here, Pia and Schwartz. But the Henri photo has great value because it makes it much easier to see the image. And, so it really helps in a person seeing it and being able to take it in without having to be taught about it. This photo here is a transmitted light flow photo. So in STIRP, they had all these protocols But Barry Schwartz had extra time. So what he did was he put light behind the shroud, and then he took the photo. I'm sorry, having computer problems. And so what you see here is this is the front image, the ventral image. You can see the blood on the hands. You see the blood on the wrist. The blood's going down, and on the top one, looks like it's going up and off. You can see all the blood, but you can't see the image. You can see the water stains. And so what this shows us is that nothing was added to the shroud to make the image. That's what this photograph proves. And now we come to some of the forensic evidence. And so the forensic evidence, I'm starting with the blood, and I have this is an enhanced image of Barry Schwartz's positive image to try and show the blood. I've done a couple other images too, so it'll give you a variety of views. So doctors Adler and Heller proved that the blood on the shroud is human. And now Kelly Kearse is a retired blood chemist. And what he says is that there are some things they didn't know because they didn't have the technology that they have today. And so he says that they didn't actually prove it because they didn't test everything they ought to have tested, which isn't a problem. But Robert Buckland, medical examiner in Houston, if you ever saw the show Quincy, that show was based on Robert Buckland, medical examiner in Houston. And what Robert Buckland did was he did an autopsy on the shroud. And he proved from his autopsy that there was an actual human body that was in this shroud, and it was that made the image. Dr. Luigi Belloni, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing his name right, sorry to Dr. Luigi, but he proved that the blood is AB. Now, all of these claims, there's always somebody to dispute it, but what I try to do is I try to study the expert in their area and get a variety of them, and if there's a consensus, then I accept that. And so I accept that this is AB human blood. Dr. Adler, he's the blood chemist from the STIRP team, he proved that the blood is exudate. And what exudate blood is it's blood that exuded from a dead body, from a corpse. And all the blood on the shroud is exudate blood.
How do they determine that? Do you know how they make that determination if it's that type of blood? Because I get the AB blood type, matching, and that actually matches the face cloth, the OVL. What you guys know what that's called?
The Orvieto face cloth.
Okay. The blood type, from my understanding, is the same as that. It's a very rare blood type, but you said that the blood that is on the shroud does it have some type of chemical in it that would lead people to think that was okay, so RN here says because it is serum. Here we go. That makes sense. It would have. Are you saying RN? This is okay, if you guys can see in the chat. I just popped. Slam RN is a real nurse, my understanding, and she knows that the blood, if a corpse or somebody is dead, and the blood that comes out of it, are you saying that that's what it has in it? Is this extra chemical? And Joe or Janice, I muted you because there was somebody who was giving off an echo, and I'm not sure who it was, so I just muted everybody. So if you want to unmute yourself and come back on, you absolutely can. Nobody is replying to that. Okay, so she says it's serum. I'm assuming that is what it tested for. Am I right on that, Andy, or you're not sure?
I believe that's right. That sounds right, but I'm not an expert in that, so I don't remember everything I read, but that sounds pretty darn familiar.
Okay. Well,
there was also the amount that came from someone who was so stressed and hurt, and that included it within this, in the serum and the It starts with a B, but it's when you're so stressed.
Billy
it-
Rubin.
Billy Rubin. Yeah.
Billy Rubin, yes. Okay, thanks.
All right, Andy, go ahead.
Okay. And so all the blood on the shroud fluoresces because Billy Rubin is in the blood, and that's the thing that tells us that it's exudate blood. If that makes sense, hopefully that's correct. Because I'm not a medical guy, so I defer to any medical expert rather than me talking about it. And here's a couple other images of the blood. And so this is a image enhancement that I did back in 2010, I think. And so an attempt to show you all the blood that's on the face. And I inversed it so you could see it in both blue, white, and in red. And then this one I did, this is a negative image that I enhanced to try and highlight the blood. Of course, it also highlights the burn marks, but most of what I captured there is the blood that's bright. And I was just trying to capture it to make it easier to picture, easier to see. And so now we have the crown of thorns. And now what's interesting about the crown of thorns is that there isn't a record of any crucifixion victim crowned with the crown of thorns except for Jesus. And Jesus' record of being crowned with a crown of thorns is by an eyewitness in John 19:2, as they mocked him for being called the King of the Jews. And you can read about that in the Bible in John 19 and Mark 16. You can get some of that information. And what you see here is you see a 3D image. This is from the work of Petrus-Soons. So what Dr. Petrus-Soons did is he got rid of all the noise in the image, and he made a full body hologram of the shroud, the image of the shroud, based on the data of the shroud. So this is not artwork. This is science. And you can see the blood. If you look at the top of the head, you can see that the blood is actually on the top of the head and not, on the flat image, it looks like it's out in space somewhere. But with the 3D, it makes it much more easy to see that this crown of thorns wasn't, as you normally see, a beautiful image where you have a two-layer crown of thorns going around his forehead. But it was more like a helmet or a cap of thorns. And then here's another look done with a filter, attempting to highlight the human blood in red, and so you can see all the blood there. And this image is in our slides. So if you went to our website and looked at the Shroud of Turin presentation, you can see this image, and you can put it on your monitor and blow it up or do whatever you want with it. And then we have the scourging. And so the scourging, my counting, and I may have not counted right. I did this when I actually wasn't a deacon, when I had more time. I took the negative image, the 300 DPI, and I blew it up on my monitor. And I tried to count them. And I counted somewhere between 120 and 220 scourge wounds, depending on how you count them. If I counted them incorrectly, then I got the 220 maybe. But the scourge wounds, so at the top you see this drawing of what a Roman flagrum would have kind of looked like. And you would have had a barbell of metal or bone that would have struck the person being whipped. And so there were 3 or 4 leather things off the handle, and at the end there were these little barbells, and they would all strike, they would flare out and cause multiple injuries at once. I imagine they could break the skin. You get a lot of contusions where you get bleeding under the skin. And so they found the flagra in archaeological sites. They found the little barbell things, and when they matched them to the shroud, they matched exactly. So we know that the Roman flagrum was the one that made these scourge marks. And you can see in the big image that I highlighted, it's just below the shoulders down to just above the ankles. That's the length of the scourging. from the upper back all the way down to the. It's really easy to see on the back of the legs. You can see the extent of the scourging. And this, of course, is corroborated by an eyewitness of the scourging from the Gospel of John. So here you can see the dorsal image, the back image on the right side. And then what I did was I blew this up, and this is actually a little piece of the 300 dpi image so that I can show, so it will come out so you can kind of see the different scourge marks.
This is the back? Is that
Yeah,
what
this is the back. So you see the head on the top. If you look at the image on the right, just above that red box is his head. And then this, you can see his hair in the big image, and then you can see his kind of shoulders and back.
Sure.
And this is what I tried to capture here because it's very easy to see.
Yeah, and I'm just looking down the entire back here. You look at the back of the head,
Yes.
and then you just follow that all the way down to the legs. It's just, I don't want to say it's amazing. It's just, it just kind of leaves you in awe of what our Savior did for us. That's
Yes. Well, yeah, he did say
kind of
that. He did say that in the Gospels. He said, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down freely." He said that very clearly.
Yeah.
Andy, do you think that's a pigtail in the back there? That's another point of contention among researchers.
Oh no, definitely not a pigtail. His hair is matted. So the first century leaders would not have cut their hair. They weren't allowed to cut their hair. So he has long hair, but Jesus was not a hippie. I think what happened is because of all the sweating and all that his hair matted, and so that's why it looks that way. I don't think he had an intentional ponytail, but I may be wrong, but it doesn't look like it. When you look at the 300 dpi image and you blow up that back area of the head with the hair, it doesn't look like it's tied at all. It looks like it's just free-flowing hair that all matted together, probably because of blood and sweat, I imagine. Does that help, Joe?
Yeah, I think, okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's just my opinion. Their opinions are like noses. Everybody has one. So now we go to the wrist wounds. And the wrist wounds, they're consistent with crucifixion. And so if you had a full body image of the shroud, like we do at the museum, and if you expect most images that you see of the crucifixion of Jesus, they always show the wound in the middle of the palm. But of course, medically, we know that if you nailed somebody in the palm, that it would tear. It wouldn't hold the weight of a human body. But down at the base of your palm, if you put your thumb there and then take one of your fingers and put it down at the back, you'll feel a little indentation. That's called desktop space. And when you nail someone through desktop space, that's proven to hold the dead weight of a human body. Because ordinarily the human body, we give resistance to gravity, but a dead body doesn't have any resistance to gravity, and so it acts as if it has more weight than it has because there's no resistance to the gravity. And the tests by forensic experts have proven that nailing the hand there. What I normally do when we are in the museum is you put the center of your palm where that image is, where the nail wound is, and your fingers are very short. But if you put the base of your palm where that wound is, then the fingers are exactly the right length. And so we know that that's where he was nailed. Of course, the Romans were experts in crucifixion, and so they would have known that just from experience, I expect. And you see the blood flow. I note the blood flow going from the wrist up toward, well, it would have been down when he was up in the form of crucifixion. So we know that happened when his arm was up, because the blood is flowing down toward his elbows and off. Now, interestingly, Dr. Buckland supports Dr. Barbet that the puncture hit the median nerve and that drew the thumb into the palm. And so on this image, you can't see a thumb on either hand. And that's one explanation. Dr. Soons supports Dr. Zugaby. Zugaby was a New York medical examiner who did a lot of studies with the shroud also. And they say that the thumb was at rest, and because it's at rest, it wouldn't be visible. So there's two different explanations for why the thumb isn't there. It's not really important whether I agree with one or the other. I really just care about why it was, and I'll accept the experts. So thumb at rest or hitting the median nerve, either one works for me. But that is medical. These are medical doctors who are making these opinions, so I accept their opinion. So I accept both of them. It's fine with me. And that's the wrist wounds. And then we have the lance wound. And so we see the lance wound. If you look on the right side of this image, you'll see just under where I have blood flow in the arrow, this is the actual lance wound. And the wound, you can kind of see the shape of the lance from that, and then the blood is flowing down. And because the blood is flowing down, obviously the body was upright when that happened. On the left side of the image, you see the post-mortem blood flow. So when they took the body off the cross and laid it in the shroud, what would have happened is it would have compressed, and any blood that was left would have came out and pooled. And what you see pooling down in the bottom part, and then it flows up, so to speak, toward the left side of the shroud. And so that's called the belt of blood. That's normally what that's called. And an eyewitness records it in John 19:31-37 that blood and water flowed out. Now, when blood and water flows out, that's a proof of death. The man in the shroud was most certainly dead. I mean, aside from the forensic experts that said it, the biblical account that says blood and water, well, we know that it would have been blood and pericardial fluid, the fluid in the sac around the heart. And each one would have came out separately because the man was dead. That's why he would have reported that it came out and it looked separate. And that's why. And so that's just another area of, proof, if you will, of the death of this man. And then we have the foot wound. Now, this is a blown up 300 DPI image of the back of the feet. And it doesn't look as good as it did when I was looking at it when I created this, because I did a lot of work this week to create some unique images to try and capture it. In the center, on the foot on the right side of the photo, you see in the center, you can see the wound. On the heels, you can see blood. There's no wound, there's just blood. And so what they would have done was they would have taken, and here we go here, we can see, this is work from Dr. Soons, who's a medical doctor. And so we see how the left foot was over the right foot, and he traces the toes of the left foot on the right side of the right foot, if that's not too confusing. And in this photo, what I've done is I've compared the push contrast negative to Barry Schwartz's 1978 negative. And so you can see they're both high definition photos. The one on the top has either blacker blacks or lighter lights. And that's the effect of the push contrast image. On the bottom photo, Schwartz's 78 photo, you have a lot of gray tones. And so you have a little bit more definition. You can see it around the hands. You can see the definition where on the hand that has the wound, you see it's very dark. Whereas on Ray's photo, if you look at the same area, it's not nearly as dark. So that push contrast light in that area in an attempt. The purpose was to help us see the image better. And this was, until Barry Schwartz took his 1978 photo, this is the best image that we had of the shroud. So it does serve a great purpose for the shroud. And so I have just a couple of slides with a summary. The scientific consensus is that the image was made by something that caused oxidation, dehydration, and conjugation of the polysaccharide structure of the microfibrils of the linen itself. And so we know that the body was most certainly dead because the blood exuded from a corpse, and a corpse isn't alive by definition. And the eyewitness to the spear wound where blood and water flowed out, and we know separation of blood and water, pericardial fluid, is a proof of death. So there, we have at least two proofs of death, and if Joe and Janice have anything to add on that, that's fine. But those are just the two that I'm pointing out to prove that the man on the shroud, whoever it was, you know, I mean, all the evidence points to it being Jesus, but there's no way to prove it. And so, you know, that really the meaning of the shroud is in the heart and the mind of the one who looks upon it. That's the most important thing. I have a little bit of summary of what the shroud is not. It's not bodily secretions, the image itself. It's not bodily secretions. It's not a burn mark or scorch. It's not a painting, dye, etching, or rubbing. And you saw that when you saw the backlit photo. You saw that there was nothing on the shroud that made the image. There's no sulfide pigments like vermilion, mercury, sulfide, none of that. So it couldn't have been painted on. The medullas of the fibrils show no coloration. There's no binding, no binders, no cementing substances found between the fibers. Rogers' pyrolysis mass spectrometry analysis revealed no impurities. And if there were organic or inorganic impurities, they would have changed parts of the image during the Chambray fire. So that's Rogers' conclusion. It's not made by thermal or radiation-induced dehydration because it would have changed the chemical structure of the shroud. And Rogers, who is a world-class pyrolysis chemist, said that that's not what he found. And that was his area of expertise, so I had to accept that. It's not a medieval photograph. The first chemical photo was created in 1826. It can't be made by an artist. The image doesn't have a pattern, and all human work has patterns. It doesn't have any image directionality, the direction of light. Fourier analysis shows no brush stroke directionality, and the image went on after the blood. If someone were to create this image, they would create the image first and put the blood on after. And so for all these reasons, this is what I say. Should I stop the slideshow, or do you want to re-attack on anything or comment or ask?
Well, I do have a couple questions that I wanted to ask. I've been watching the chat to see if they've had any additional questions, and there's been a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of interaction there, but no specific questions. But okay, so let's see here. I'll start with the forensic evidence for the shroud. When we start looking at this, when I was reading a couple of weeks, I read several articles, and I didn't even realize that there were other forensic tests that you could perform on some type of artifact that would give you different dates. Now, the one that came up last week was the Langdon test, or I don't get know how to pronounce it correctly, but the fact was that it gave dates that were very old. So here's the question: are there any? Because when we look at these other tests that have come up that have dated it back to the first century, or at least put that within the dating period, are there any other tests out there that any of you are aware of that place the dates that are consistent with the radiocarbon dates that they found in the 1988 testing, which was like 1230 to 1390 or something? Somewhere
yeah, 1260 to 1390. No, actually, interestingly, right? Ray Rogers wrote his paper when he proved that that wasn't the case, and that that he proved Joe Marino and his wife, with their theory that it was a repair area. He proved that. And what he did in his paper was he tested the vanillin in the shroud, and he found that based on the known reduction of vanillin, that the shroud was 2,000 to 3,000 years old. So the vanillin test is very interesting, and that came out of examining the test itself.
Okay. Joe, Janice, Aruna, did you want to say anything about that? Because I just want to make an observation here, is that we have several different testing methods that have dated the shroud within where it could plausibly go back to the 1st century, and that those all would be consistent with that date. However, we have no other dating methods or test dates, forensic test dates, that would put it within the time frame of the carbon-14 dating that occurred in 1988. And I think that's it's when we start looking at the different points of congruence that come into, formulating, a hypothesis. You say, okay, well, you have to have different dating methods, and they all point towards a 1st century cloth, and then you have one that is an outlier. You normally just throw that outlier out, right?
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a general misconception among the public that carbon-14 tests are generally infallible, and nothing could be further from the truth. They're often wrong, and C14 labs often throw out dates even when they don't know what causes an outlier. It's really a confirmatory test. You usually use C14 in conjunction with other testing, but in the case of the shroud, special rules were made, and it was made to be the end all and be all, and all the other scientific evidence on the shroud was thrown out, and C14 was kept, which is just not normally done.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, Joe, that is true, but because people will, when they submit samples to be tested for carbon-14, they, the lab that normally does the testing generally asks, well, what type of dates are you looking for? What type of evidence do you have that support such and such a date? And they confirm that date. Whereas here, they were going into it saying, okay, well, we have no idea, or we know it's not the 1st century, so give us some dates that are not in the 1st century.
Yeah, so they're not doing science then. They're just supporting the assumption.
Okay. Yeah, correct. Absolutely correct. Okay. Didn't someone on the dating teams admit something wrongdoing before? Okay. RN has a question. She said, didn't someone on the dating teams admit some wrongdoing before he died? I think she's talking about Ray Rogers. Joe would be able to comment, I think, on that.
Well, Ray Rogers was not on the dating team. It seems like she's asking something about one of the C14 representatives. I can tell you various stories that are very suspect. But for example, Dr. Michael Tite was the overseer of the test. He was from the British Museum, and Teddy Hall from Oxford was on the board of directors of the British Museum, which was a conflict of interest right there. And then right after the dating, Teddy Hall retired, and then the Oxford lab was given a £1 million donation, ostensibly for having proven the shroud to be a fake. And then when Hall retired, guess who got Hall's job? Dr. Michael Tite from the British Museum, who was supposedly the supposed independent overseer. So that
say that. Where did the money come from? Whoa.
Rich businessmen, anonymous rich businessmen, donated £1 million. And get this, when the raw data from the British Museum was finally released after a Freedom of Information Act in 2017, the person that filed that was a French researcher, and they came out with a peer-reviewed article in 2019. I saw him at a conference in 2019, and I asked him if he had asked or put in a request to find out who the rich businessmen were. And he said he had. And guess what? They have not revealed that information yet. They gave the raw data from the lab's results, but they have not released to this day who those rich businessmen were that donated £1 million.
Are they required to, I mean, by law to?
Yeah,
to
they
do that, or-
that request should have been fulfilled by now. It's almost 4 years now. So
Wow.
they're obviously hiding something there.
That's amazing. I'd never heard that. Money, or no. Let me put the love of money is the root of all evil. Let's just
Yeah.
make sure I get it right.
If you want to find it, follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money, honey. There
When
you go.
When you read Joe's book, Eric, you're going to know the whole story.
Okay. Okay. Here's another question that I have here. When we look at, because there's always, I mean, okay, based on what you guys have presented here and what we went through, $2.5 million. There you go. Which that makes a lot more sense to me being an American. Instead of £1 million. You tell me it's £1 million. I said, okay, well, it sounds like a lot, but I don't know how much that is. That might be 50 cents. Because, if you look at £1,000,000 lira, because I lived in Italy for so long, £1,000,000 lira is what, $1,000. So, okay, that makes better sense. Thank you, Annette. Okay, now, there's a reason why people don't believe that the Shroud of Turin is the burial cloth of Christ. If we were just listening to, the show last week, we listened to the show this week, people are saying, oh, well, it's the burial cloth of Christ. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's go, have a coffee or something. There are objections out there. And when you guys encounter objections, what would you say would be the strongest objection to the shroud itself is not being what the claims are, that it is in fact is the burial cloth of Christ?
I'd say the two biggest things are the lack of a clear history before the 1350s, and then the C14 test. But there's plausible explanations for both of those. I cover the C14 explanation in my book. And as far as the history goes, just, read some of Ian Wilson's stuff. And you wouldn't expect, if it existed, that especially given Jewish norms about impure objects and stuff, you wouldn't expect them to have paraded the shroud around in the early days. And you would also expect it to be hidden away most of the time. I mean, if it was believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus, it wouldn't be the sort of object people would pass around and say, here's your chance with it. I mean, it would be hidden away for long periods of time. And go ahead.
I was going to say that makes perfectly good sense. It'd be like being in possession of the Ark of the Covenant.
Sure.
Now people walk around, I got the Ark of the Covenant in my basement. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let me go over and pay you a visit. Now, when you said that there's no clear, I'm sure you would have to qualify the word clear as far as there's no clear history of the shroud. Can you think of any other artifact from that era that would have a quantifiable, clear history of, because in law enforcement, Janice could attest to this. In law enforcement, you have to have a chain of possession, for evidence. Now, is there any other artifact or any other something else that we could have a clear chain?
Yeah, there's something called the image of Edessa, which goes back at least to the 500s, and then that was taken to Constantinople in 944, and from that point it became known as the Mandylion. So, I mean, we can almost get back, and there are other references in the documentation of burial linens of Christ that go all the way back to the 1st century. Okay,
maybe I didn't word that right. Are you saying that this image of Edessa isn't that the shroud? Is that the shroud or no?
Well, some of the sources seem to indicate that it was only a facial image, but
okay.
Also
right.
So indicate that it was there was a full-length image as well.
Well, you know what's exciting about that facial image is that the Wangers and even Dr. Soons saw this halo around the head, and they said that what happened is that it was in a box, and so only the face was showing. But then on special dates, they would raise it up, and so then that's when other people wrote about a full length of a man showing, where it had only been the face from this box.
Yes, Petrus actually came here to Alamogordo and did research with Pete Schumacher on the oval around the face, and they wrote a paper, and that's on our website. And it's really fascinating.
And at that toe, and I saw someone put up a link up where underneath the chin, there is a relief. And Andy, you might be able to talk about it better, but the letters that Dr. Soon saw were 3 letters. And depending on if you look at a Hebrew Bible text or Aramaic, it would say a small animal, or somebody said father, but it says in Aramaic, lamb.
Right, yeah, that's Petrus in his 3D work. He found what looks like a little plaque or box on the image, and the word on that is son, and son means lamb. That's Hebrew for lamb. He did an extensive presentation in Alamogordo. He's been up here 3 or 4 times. We've had a bunch of speakers, and his research is very exciting.
Okay, okay. Let me go back to my question here, because I don't think you understood it correctly. What I'm asking for, okay, there is a history of the shroud, and we can talk about the king of Agbar, is something of those lines.
Yeah, I love that story. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, hey, I was reading. Guy sent me the first chapter of his book just to give it a kind of just to get an idea of what he's writing about, and I'm just going to say the king's in there. I hope that doesn't give away his book and I get in trouble for it, but the king is in there. Okay, but you have the King Agbar, and then you have the mention in Edessa, then you have the mention of Constantine, was it the 7th? A couple other mentions in the encyclopedia, Ecclesiastical Encyclopedia. You have a inventory. You have a couple other mentions of it. But my question, okay, here's my question. Is there, that you know of anyway, is there any other artifact when Joe mentioned that you don't have a real clear chain of custody? Is there an artifact from that time period where we do have a clear chain of custody? Something else. It could be, it could be a Toyota. I don't care what it is, but something that existed in the 1st century, where we've had this clear chain of possession since then that any of you are aware of. Because if people are going to make and say, okay, well, there's not this clear chain of possession, and use that as an objection, well, then you would have to have that quantifiable by something else where we can say that, hey, we do have a clear chain of possession of this relic or this item or something along those lines from that time period. Is there anything that you guys are aware of that would meet that definition?
We have the Sudarium, Oviedo, Spain, and we know that's dated, and its possession is trackable, and we know that's in congruence with the shroud for several different reasons. So we're really only talking a few years that is between when the apostles took the shroud from the tomb and, like Joe said, kept it hidden, and then to King Abgar. And then we know there was the wall that the shroud was put in. So we can pretty well track it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the only evidence that you can really think of off the top of your head actually gives the shroud more credibility than what it had before.
Exactly.
You can say that you can construct a plausible history pretty much back to the 1st century based on all the documentation. I just recently did an article that's on academia called, I think it's post-gospel and pre-1350s references to the possible Shroud of Jesus. I can't even remember my own title, but if you go to academia and look, put my name in the search box, my articles will come up, and I list there all the different references in history to instances where it could be, not that it is the shroud, but different references to burial linens and such that actually could be the shroud. And of course, you almost have to point out for some people that it wouldn't have been called the Shroud of Turin in those days because it's only been in Turin since 1578. So it would have been called something else. And we do have the image of Edessa and the Mendelian. And it's very plausible that the shroud is actually those known historical cloths.
Okay. All righty.
Can I add something?
Go ahead.
For me, the legend of King Akbar is important, not because of the legend part, because the legend says that he had leprosy and he believed Christ could heal him, and he sent an emissary, and he had already been crucified. And then St. Jude sends Adai, who was one of the 72 that Jesus sent out to preach in pairs, and this is where the legend ends and history starts, because Adai actually went to Edessa, and the legend says that he was in its presence for 10 days and was healed. Well, King Akbar let him preach, and the first thing that Adai did was he ordained bishops, priests, and deacons, and he established churches. And this information is in the doctrine of Adai, which was part of the city of Edessa's historical records. And so, that might be something that you're looking at. I'm not quite sure. That doesn't show the history of the shroud per se, but it does show that Edessa was the first Christian city.
Okay, so is this a copy of what you're saying is what they found is a copy, or is this is an original manuscript that?
I'm not sure if you have the original manuscript. You can find it online. I bought one that has the original language and then the translation on the other page, or you can just find it online. The doctrine, it's the doctrine of Adai itself, that document that was translated. It's translated into English. It's Old English. It was done 100 years ago, but it's for free online. You can read it for yourself and decide what you think.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing about, like, for example, when the image of Edessa was brought to Constantinople in 944, we have records of when it was received there and some comments. So, for example, the emperor's sons saw this image, and one of them said that the image was blurred, and another one, they described it as a moist secretion without artificial coloring or stain. And if you think about it, both of those are very good descriptions of what somebody looking at the Shroud of Turin might describe it as. So you're not going to get 100% verification. You're just going to get clues that certain cloths might have been the shroud in those days.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other. Oh, here's one from Annette. She said, don't forget he was the man from Galilee, so the shroud hightailed it out of Jerusalem, then went to liberal Galilee. What is that, like a blue state? The liberal Galilee, then went to Damascus and blinded Paul, then to Antioch, then to Edessa. I know it ended up in Edessa. Is this the second, or is that the first place that we hear of it? Is in Edessa? Am I right on that?
Pretty much.
Other than the gospel message where it's in the tube. Okay. All right. I have one more, and then I'm going to be out of questions. So you people from over here in the chat, you're going to have to square me away here. Okay. All three of y'all, the Southern draw that I developed when I was in the Army. What is the best single source of evidence, according to you, your feeling is for the shroud being the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ? And if you don't think it is the burial cloth, I mean, that's okay. Well, it's not I guess you wouldn't be doing what you were doing if you didn't think it was the burial cloth of Christ. But what would you say is your best evidence? Joe looks like he's eager to pounce on this one like it's low hanging fruit. So go ahead, sir.
I would just say it's really a combination of all the evidence that's come down since 1898, and the fact that people don't appreciate the fact that the STIRP team was made up mostly of scientists who worked on the U.S. nuclear and space programs. These guys put men in space. They built nuclear weapons. I think they were smart enough to figure out if that thing was a forgery or not, and most of them thought they were going to figure it out. And the fact that they probably conservatively spent about 250,000 hours studying the data and putting their data together, and that they couldn't figure out after all that time how that image got on the cloth. And then the other big factor for me, I think, is the amount of doctors and surgeons that have studied it over the years, especially the ones. Dr. Zugabe studied it 50 years, Buckern studied it 50 years. These are pretty intelligent guys, and they were practically able to do autopsies based on the photographs. I find it almost impossible to be able to think that a medieval forger was good enough to fool 20th century space age scientists and 20th and 21st century surgeons and doctors. I think it's really just a combination of all the evidence.
Okay, so we would call that the preponderance of the evidence convinces you. All right, Andy, Janice. Now, if I mute you guys, don't get upset if I mute you, because I'm getting a lot of feedback here from chat saying there's an echo.
Well, for me, I've always known about the shroud and always thought that what I read in the Bible matched with what I saw early on about the shroud, about the scourging, the crown of thorns, the nails. And when I looked at the VP8 image analyzer and saw what appeared as the portrait of the man of the shroud, of Jesus, of the wounds and everything else, it was overwhelming, because not only was that the only photograph that does that kind of relief portraiture, but it jumps out at you. And if you look at the area where the spear went to the heart and the pericardium, when you see that on the VP8, the monitor, you see that whiteness of the blood comes right out at you. So it just jumps out at you as the blood. So all of that together, and then meeting all these wonderful shroud researchers and being at conferences, it's very good. It's overwhelming to me. This is the burial cloth of Jesus.
All right. All right, Mr. Andy. You got to unmute yourself, sir.
All right, I've unmuted myself. So for me, there's two reasons. One is the preponderance of evidence, not just scientific evidence, not just medical evidence, but also scriptural evidence, because that's real evidence. When I read the prophecies in Isaiah, Psalm 22, Zechariah 12, when I read the passages in the Gospels, I can see that on the shroud. That's part of, for me, of the preponderance of evidence. But the other piece of evidence that doesn't directly affect the shroud is the effect it has on those who study it. For those who study it, who accept the scientific evidence, even if they don't have any religious evidence, they all accept that it's authentic. And what has happened to each and every one of us is that we've been changed. Joe went to a monastery. I became a deacon. Pete became a deacon. Barry Schwartz says that his faith in God was restored by a study of a Christian relic, the shroud. You know, I mean, the effect on people to me is one of the biggest pieces of evidence that there's got to be something more to it than just hocus pocus.
May I interject?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
There are two things that made a difference to me in terms of evidence, which I found a bit strange. One was Max Fry and his pollen tests. Joe, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he found pollen from the Dead Sea area, which is exclusive to the Dead Sea area, not found anywhere else. And it's one of the reasons that held me, because I've sort of been another Shroudie, following ever since I read Ian Wilson's book in 1978. That's what held me. I didn't think that a carbon-14 dating could trump every other kind of evidence. The pollen evidence for me was confirmatory.
Okay, so
The other one,
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. The other one was, if you look at the shroud, there are no thumbs visible. They're retracted. And I think there was a forensic pathology expert in the early 1920s, or maybe even in the 19th century. And he did some experiments, wondered why the thumbs were retracted. And he put in nails in the place where he found the spot in the shroud, and it hit the median nerve and the thumbs just went in. Otherwise, some bones would have broken in the wrist. So that now links you up with the Old Testament prophecy that not a bone of his would be broken. I find that quite profound, these two elements.
Okay, so just I'm going to go down the list. Okay, Joe, the evidences since 18, it was the preponderance of the evidences, and also the team's analysis could not prove that it was a forgery. Then Janice's, it was the VP8 analyzer, the evidence from that, and then Andy's was the preponderance, and also the profound effect it has on people. And Aruna was the pollen test. When, and if you the pollens are found, was the 22 pollens were indigenous to Constantinople, 7 were indigenous to Israel. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but the pollens that were found on the shroud, and also the thumbs being retracted from the nail going through the median, not the medial. I think SlamRN made a definition of that, because when you push it, or when it goes through there, it's going to cause the thumb to, I can't get it up there, but there we go, thumb to retract when it goes in. It causes that to retract. And you all are wrong. I'm just kidding. And here, from my experience arguing the creation evolution topic for until you're blue in the face, until you just get sick and tired of listening to it. But these are all great evidences that support the shroud. But the one that when you ask an evolutionist about, well, you know, we all know that we evolved from this single-celled organism, and we, in all extant species that we see today, are a result of natural selection and mutations in the DNA, which is fine. You know, it's a fairy tale for adults as far as I'm concerned when you start talking about that. But you have to start somewhere. And what are you starting with? You're starting with a single-celled organism. Then you have to come up with an explanation as how that single cell organism arrived. How did it? How do you get inorganic matter to become a living thing that is self-replicating? How does that happen? And they would just want to change the subject. They automatically, well, let's go talk about this. You know, look at here, look at this monkey here, and look at over here. We've got a rhinoceros over here. And it just shuts your mouth. Tell me how this started. And I think the same thing is true here about the shroud. When it was Joe who said that this team of people who put people on different planets, for Pete's sake, in our solar system. So you're talking about people that are truly rocket scientists and wizards of smart that are capable of doing that, cannot explain to us how this image got on the shroud. That's what I'm trying to figure out. How can you get an image that is not a scorch mark? That's is obvious, and it's only a few fibers deep onto a piece of linen that produces an image, a 3D image that we get from the VP8. How do you do that, even if you want to date it to the Middle Ages? And that has to be answered before anything else can be answered. And I've seen, they painted it on there. They did that. They rubbed it on. You see every excuse under the sun, just like evolutionists like to use, like on, for the origin of life. Well, it was a bunch of crystals getting on the back of something. Shut your mouth. Show it to me. I mean, this is evidence. If you want to say that this is empirical evidence, the type of evidence that is, that's demonstrable, falsifiable, repeatable, if you are indeed trying to step in and stay in the realm of science, prove it, baby. And they can't. And I think that by pointing that out to people who are detractors of the shroud needs to be done first and foremost. Just tell me how that image got on there, and you'll get nothing but crickets. There was a couple other questions that were in, or did anybody else have a comment on that to tell me how wrong I am?
Okay. Specifically in terms of the scientific evidence, I would say the three-dimensionality, superficiality, and photonegativity, those three combined, just by itself, I think negates the possibility that a medieval forger could have done it.
Right. And one other thing that is visible is that of the people that I've read, the books and everything else, they point out the terror of what this shroud portrays, the pain, everything else. But Dr. Heller, in his book, he made the comment, when you look at the face, it shows peace and calm and love. And so who do we know that has been crucified when they haven't done anything wrong? And it just goes to the weight of the man of the shroud.
Yeah, that's a great point. Did you want to add anything, Aruna or Andy? Did you want to add anything to that?
I would add one thing to Joe's. You also have the biological evidence on the shroud that they didn't know about until the last century. They didn't know about the bilirubin. They didn't know about the fluorescing. There's a lot of that kind of stuff they didn't know. There's just too much, and they can't reproduce all that. It's not possible.
It's kind of like going back to Psalm 22, talking about the process of crucifixion before it's even invented, 500 years before that. Aruna, I think you were getting closer to your computer, like you were going to say something, or yes or no? Okay, you're not muted. You are muted. Okay. All right. Okay, I have a couple questions that did come out of chat. One of them dealt with the Eastern Orthodox Church, and I might be wrong on this, Sam, if you want to put this back in the chat, but is there a connection between the shroud and the Eastern Orthodox? I hate to say it, but it's kind of this love affair with church relics. If anybody goes to the Church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You talk about a bling party as far as having all kinds of things that are just absolutely beautiful on the place that is supposed to be Golgotha, and also the burial tomb of Christ himself. Is there a connection between Eastern Orthodox iconoclasm, or the that was a controversy, but it doesn't matter. Is there a tie between the relics and the shroud that any of you can see?
Well, in the Orthodox, they have a thing called anti-mention, and what they have is they have a corporal that's spread over the altar that has a drawn image of the body of the shroud on it. which is really fascinating. I learned
They have a what now?
It's called antimension. And so in the church, when they have the divine liturgy, they have a cloth on it. It's called a corporal. They have cloths on it. And so they have this big one, and it has an image of the man of the shroud drawn on this corporal, and that's where they celebrate Mass.
Okay.
If I can add something on the Holy Sepulchre, the University of Athens, Greece, did an excavation of that burial little house, the Etul, and they did that because the structure was in need. So the churches, the three churches that are part of that, said, okay, let's do it. And so when they went down, they were able to get to the area where the body of Jesus's body was laid. So they call that the tomb of Jesus and where Jesus's body was laid. And they made a little window so that the visitors can see that.
I just remember when I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there was people that were standing in line, and it's 100 degrees in there, and they're standing in line so they could put their hand. They have to get underneath this altar, and they want to reach down and they want to touch. And I completely get that, but I just walked around. I said, I'm not going to do that. And then the same thing was true with the tomb of Christ. There was this line that, extends, out the door just to walk in there. And I'm sure there's some Nazi's a bad word, but somebody's saying there, hey, hurry it up, look, you got 2 seconds. And so it just wouldn't have been, I guess, worth it for me. But that you're absolutely right. Now, RN said that it was the iconography, the look of Jesus in the icon. So I think that's what you all were saying, and we did get that right. All right, thank you, RN, for that question. There was another one that came from one of our...
Eric, while you're looking, can I just mention real quickly, the Eastern Orthodox have a tradition called epitaphios, which is basically iconography on linen cloths done by Eastern Orthodox monks, and that's very prevalent in their liturgies.
And do you have any idea how long that practice has gone on for? Is it traceable back to a certain time?
Andy, do you know? I don't know an exact date, but it goes back pretty far.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I was thinking about the iconography, the images of Christ. So there's a certain point in history, I can't remember when, but for the first part, they always showed Christ as the new philosopher, and he was dressed as a Greek philosopher. And then apparently after everybody discovers the shroud, the iconography of Christ completely changes. And now all the iconography aligns with the image on the shroud, which is fascinating in and of itself.
So when did that change again?
Yeah, probably around 525.
560. And that's in St. Catherine's in Mount Sinai. And that's where they have this beginning of painting of the face of Christ, saying, so we know that someone had to have looked at the shroud because where the eyes are and the nose are proportionate. So you could see the same similarity in the paintings.
Okay, so and that would correspond to around where we first start hearing about the shroud being in Edessa.
Right.
Is that about the same time frame?
It was apparently rediscovered in the city walls after the flood.
Okay. All right. One more question. It was from, I tried to figure out, I was kind of pausing there because I couldn't remember who it was from, but it was from our friend Animal, which is kind of a cool little chat room name. He was talking about the carbon-14 dating, and Animal is going to be glad to hear from Joe. Joe, because Animal said, well, wasn't there something sewn into the fabric, yada, 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 that gave the false carbon-14 dates?
Yeah, basically Ray Rogers had some leftover samples from the 1978 study in his possession, and he also had some samples from what's called the Reyes sample, named after the Belgian textile expert Gilbert Reyes, who was given a small piece of the shroud in 1973. So after Sue and I proposed our theory, and Barry Schwartz published our paper on shroud.com, Ray Rogers was very upset at Barry for publishing that, because he said we were part of the lunatic fringe. And he told Barry he could prove us wrong in 5 minutes. So he got out his samples from the main part of the shroud and the samples from the Reyes sample and compared the two. And then later got an actual leftover sample from the 1988 C14 dating. And he found that the Reyes sample and the C14 sample were different from the main part of the shroud. And in the Reyes sample, he found, or in that area, he found a splice of cotton and linen, and he also found a mordant and a dye. So all of that indicates that the C14 corner was repaired.
Okay, can you emphasize why it being cotton is so important?
Because when they repaired it, if they want to make it look like the original, linen is very hard to dye, but cotton is much easier. So if you use cotton, you can approximate the color and better than if you just tried to do the linen. And there's a technique called the invisible French reweave, which when it was probably done in the 16th century, it was the shroud was owned by by Margaret of Austria at the time, and she had access to the best weavers in Europe, and they were apparently able to do an invisible reweave such that the corner was repaired, and you couldn't really tell that any work had been done on it at all.
Okay, can you tell us, if you know, why did they choose to test an area that had been handled the most over the centuries? I mean, if you were going to test something and to get it, because that, if there was going to be any type of contamination, more recent carbon added and contaminating the sample, it would be on the corners. Do you have any idea why they chose that area?
They asked the scientific advisor, the late Professor Ganella, and he said expediency. And basically that means that corner had already been cut on. That was the corner that they had taken the Reyes sample from. And they were worried about disfiguring the shroud more. They said, well, this corner has already been cut on, so we'll take a sample from that area. Even though everybody recommended against it, and they were supposed to have taken at least three different samples from different areas of the cloth, but there were lots of screw ups, and that was one of them, picking that corner for one sample only.
Okay, I do have another question from Connie. It was dealing with the show is about the differences between Christianity and Islam. Have you guys ever encountered any type of objections from people of the Islamic faith to the shroud, whether it's in your museum, whether in your books, whether it's at your conferences or anything of the like?
I've just seen a few articles, and there's also I think a Hindu group that also maintain that the shroud shows that Jesus was actually alive. But I think, as Andy has pointed out, there's enough medical evidence to really say that the man was dead and there was no chance that he was alive.
Okay. All right, and as I said at the outset of the show, when we start looking at, the purpose of this show and the Tuesday night show that I have is to confront some of the challenges that the Islamic faith places against or has against Christianity. And we address a lot of those. And I would, as a Christian, you always want to have a good, strong apologetic in defending all, the Bible and the evidences for that. So we speak quite a bit about the manuscript evidence for the Bible and what supports that. We talk about how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies, but we address a lot of times the objections that Muslims have, the polemics that Muslims have against Christianity, but also we like to, because unless you're like the Denver Broncos who won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, only because they had a really good defense, you're never going to win the discussion. You're never going to win the argument. So you have to have an offensive argument against Islam itself. And as I said at the beginning of the show, the number one verse in the Quran that I personally believe clearly demonstrates that Islam is false, that Muhammad was not a prophet, is 4:157, where he clearly says that Jesus was not crucified. And here's another thing that I always ask him. I said, if you think that Jesus was not crucified outside of the Quran, can you cite any source that Jesus was not crucified? Can you show me any type of biblical scholar that is published in any theological peer-reviewed journal that makes the affirmation that Jesus was never crucified? You never get that. But if you can show them, if you have this one piece of evidence that this is indeed, and we all know that we cannot conclusively say that this is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. But doggone. If you can't, for me, this is just exactly something that like God would do. He would say, look, I'm giving you something and, you figure it out. And, all these wizards are smart that come out and talk about, how superstitious Christianity is and how religious people are not academics. And you just show them this and say, okay, go ahead. I'll wait for your comment soon. Okay, any party comments that anybody has? We got about 3 minutes left in the show before we got to run.
I have one thing I could show you. I think this is what Janice was talking about, if you'd like me to share and show you this photo.
You send me the photos of what now?
It's a photo of what Janice was talking about, the image, the Cristo Pantocrator.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You have my email. Yeah, you can send it.
I'm showing it now. I'm sharing it.
Oh, you're showing it now. I thought you said you were going to send it to me.
This
Sorry.
is the Cristo Pantocrator that dates to around 550 or so, depending on who's doing the research.
Okay. And where is this located? This
is in St. Catherine's Monastery.
Oh, this is okay. This is in the Sinai. Am I right on that?
Okay. Yeah, Mount Sinai, down here.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And you're saying, go ahead.
And this image, we have the points of congruence, and this is the points of congruence for this particular image. Everything that is in orange are the points of congruence with the image on the shroud. It's an awful lot of points of congruence.
And how many do we have here? We have 14 here, but
14 total, but 4 are applicable to this image. So there's 10 points of congruence with the shroud with this image, the Cristo Pantocrator.
I think Gary Habermas in one of his speeches spoke about that. And when you start doing facial recognition, I'm not sure how many different points of congruence that they use in order to identify somebody consistently as who they are. And the shroud, I think he said that the shroud
90 seconds.
Okay, the shroud had something close to that. Am I right on that, or am I wrong?
Yeah, you're right, and that's the Cristo Pantocrator, and there's also images of coins And these coins are from 692 and 945, and they also have multiple points of congruence with the image on the shroud. I think we're going to run out of time, so I'll just stop sharing this for now.
No, that's and we could do a lot more of these shows.
Oh yeah, I thought you'd want to see that though.
We're gonna have to plan something here in the near future. I just can't have the whole program be about the shroud. It would be a lot of fun, but we're gonna have to have a couple other programs before we. But I would love to have you guys back on if you don't mind. I do have your email addresses, and I will be in contact with you. Here in the near future to set if we could set something up, and maybe we can knock around some ideas about other things that we want to go into. If you want to go into the coins, if you want to go into the the facial recognition things of that nature, that would all be a lot of fun, and I'm sure that the audience would love to see that. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and call her quits for the day. Joe, Andy, Janice, and Aruna, thank you guys so much for coming. I do appreciate you all spending your afternoon with me. The people in chat, all of the comments and you guys just bless me. I'm just going to be honest with you. It is a blessing to be able to do this show and have so many people come in and make the comments that they do and say the kind words that they do. So I am not going to be here next Sunday. Just 411. Chris Claus said that he was going to do it. It deals with, dare I say, it deals with Mother's Day. And, I lost my mom last year. And the last time I talked to her was on Mother's Day last year. So I thought, you'll blubber like a little baby if you got on the show and do that. So I didn't think it'd be a good idea. So Chris Claus has said he's going to come on the show next week and cover down for me. But remember, we have our show on Tuesday evening, Radio Free Kafiristan at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And Chris Claus and Isa Kabir are going to continue, or at least get off the ground, their debate on morality. Again, everybody, thank you for coming. God bless y'all, and we will see you next time on the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. God bless y'all. Thank you.
Thanks.